Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 7 of the Climate Pioneers Show. And this series, our focus is on a topic very close to my heart, hiring and building great teams. Hiring the right people in your startup is arguably the most important thing that you will do as a founder. And how you build that early stage team is absolutely crucial to the success of your business moving forward. Throughout the course of this series, we've been speaking to founders, investors, coaches, and specialists from across the spectrum of HR and talent, giving you access and advice as you build your team over time. So today is our penultimate episode of the series. I can't believe it's come around so quickly. And I'm joined by Dimple Patel, CEO of NatureMetrics. Dimple has had a fantastic career and journey to date, from big investment bank to building and selling her own coffee business to an international scale-up, and now solving one of the biggest challenges in the natural world as CEO of NatureMetrics. So I'm really keen to learn more about her journey and how building teams has been a crucial part of that for her. So Dimple, thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So are you happy to kick off by just walking us through that journey that I alluded to there in the intro? Because it's not been a linear one, right? But a really interesting one that's taken you through building and scaling businesses of different types and different sectors throughout your career. Talk us through it.
Yeah, sure. So I think, as you said, I started my career in investment banking, and that really was almost a conveyor belt decision. It was, everybody doing my degree at my university either went into consulting or banking, and I kind of followed the trend. I had a lot of student debt to pay off as well, but landed in banking in 2008, which is possibly the worst timing in history.
I remember it was started my career, so we must be the same age. Yeah,
it was absolute chaos. But I do think some of the whole, that attraction of like high stakes, high pressure, that I think is where I picked it up, because there was so much happening. You had to learn so quickly. Every decision was crucial. You had to take all of the different data points, decide, what risk you were going to take, how you manage that risk, which was incredible. But obviously, once it then calmed down, it was a very, very different place to work. And I think, whilst it was a great place to start a career, for me, it didn't feel like where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. And, we look at careers now, they're 40, 50 years of your life. And I'd always had this sense in me that I wanted to build something. I'd loved building as a child. I didn't really know where to start, what to do. So actually the coffee business really came about because I needed a business that I could get off the ground without a lot of spend. So I didn't have access to networks to raise a lot of money. I didn't know how to write code myself. And I wanted just a really simple business model that could teach me the basics of running a business and running a company without getting lost in kind of algorithms and macros, which is what I was doing in the banking world at the time. And so the coffee model fit perfectly. It was a growing market at the time. We didn't have a Costa and a Starbucks on every single corner at that point. So that's where I started. And it was very much, learn by doing situation. And I learned a huge amount about building teams and working with people. I was managing people for the first time. I was 23 years old. I had no training, no experience whatsoever. Right the way through to, how do you build financial models and your P&Ls and that whole piece. But then when I sold that, the switch to technology felt logical, because scaling physical operations is so draining. And there was something about technology and the pace at which you can scale and really extend the reach of your solution that just really appealed to me. And I knew that I wanted to keep building, but I didn't know a huge amount about tech. So that's when I joined Truva. I joined more junior. It was still very early stage, with very much this mindset of I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to learn everything. I'm going to, learn about infrastructure. I'm going to learn about I'm going to learn to code. I'm going to learn about how product management works and databases and the whole thing, which was amazing, and actually almost kind of took me back to the days of being in a slightly more technical area. And then from there, tech is broadly where I have stayed. I mean, there's kind of been some changes in terms of how it's being applied and what it's being used for. But I think a piece that has really then grown is this whole impact piece. Truva was very social impact driven. It was very focused on small businesses. Obviously, with NatureMetrics, we're much more environmental and climate focused. But it is really taking all of the kind of business experience that I picked up and applying it in a way that hopefully you can do some good.
Absolutely. And after leaving Truva, why NatureMetrics? Why was this particularly a challenge you wanted to take on? And share with us, for anyone listening who doesn't know who NatureMetrics are or what you're building, what problem you're solving, why it's so important, and how NatureMetrics are solving it.
Yeah, of course. So NatureMetrics, we're here to make biodiversity measurable at scale. So when we think about biodiversity, that is anything in relation to nature, so habitats, species. If we look at wildlife populations, we've lost 70% of our wildlife in the last 50 years. Wow. So, as a parent, and, I'm sure you will as well, when you roll that forward 50 years, you're looking at a world where actually over 90% of our wildlife has just been lost forever. And I think that for me that felt like a problem worth solving. And a really urgent problem as well, because nature is not, it's so different to carbon in many ways, but one of those ways is once you've lost it and a species is extinct, you can't bring it back.
No.
And so, we have so much focus around carbon goals and targets and reducing carbon, removing it out of the atmosphere, because there's this notion that climate change and climate problems are fixable. So you can have it become a big problem, and then you can take steps to, fix them and make things a bit better. But actually, that doesn't apply with nature. You have to prevent and reverse the trend of what we have been seeing. And for me, that was really interesting. And when you think about NatureMetrics and the technology, that was kind of the first piece that blew my mind. We use environmental DNA analysis. So that is literally running DNA analysis on soil and water samples. And we take those sequences and we match them back to species that are present in the environment. So we can, analyze a cup of water, and we could tell you that there are blue whales in that area. But all you see go into the lab is this cup of water. And it's incredible. But when you have that accuracy and the granularity of data, I was looking at this thinking, this technology has the potential to change the world. It needs scaling. It needs, a lot of the application that I had done before. How do you internationalize it? How do you apply software, data models, all of those pieces? And then fundamentally, I'm an economist by background. How do we take this data and use it to change the way that businesses and organizations operate?
Because that's the challenge, isn't it? With anything biodiversity related, carbon is a much more simpler problem to solve. You have a number, it's an amount of carbon, you're putting it into the atmosphere, you're taking it out. Biodiversity is so much more of a complex ecosystem that until you have, like, you're completely right, until there is a clear measurement for biodiversity gain or loss, and it's clear what that measurement is, it's very difficult to incentivize it, to create financial systems around it that then drive that change, right? So I suppose you're solving problem one, and until that problem's solved, it'll unlock all of that other stuff.
Absolutely. And also, really helping people understand why it's important. Like biodiversity is literally the cornerstone of things like our food systems.
Yes.
If our soil health collapses, then, we have problems that extend far beyond what you see coming from missing our carbon targets. So whilst the two are related, actually, there's so much that we take for granted that is tied to biodiversity that I think even the businesses and the operators themselves don't fully understand the extent of yet. And I think there's just something really interesting about hopefully bringing that all together to be able to drive long-lasting change that extends beyond just box ticking regulation. It becomes much more about how do we make our businesses much more resilient in the long term? How do we, create a world where actually we don't have to worry about food security? And what role does biodiversity have to play in that?
Yeah, amazing. And what stage was the business at when you joined? Because you weren't the original founder of the business, right? You came on board as CEO. Talk us through when you joined, where was the business at in terms of product maturity, people, headcount, and perhaps if you're happy to then walk us through in this last 12 months, where is it at today, and what's that evolution been that you've led it through?
Yeah, of course. So I joined the company last year. So the business had just completed its Series A extension. And from a product perspective, it was really starting this transition from being effectively a lab services led business where we were using eDNA at scale. And when I say at scale, used in over 100 countries to generate data sets of what was happening on the ground. But those data sets were being reported effectively in CSV files that were shared, and the clients would take that away and do the analysis they needed with them. The transition was really toward becoming much more of an insights offering. Okay. So that difference between, we still have the data generation engine, but actually then what is the data telling us? Mm-hmm. And what should we then do with that? What are the decisions that we need to be taking? And that was really the intelligent platform. We launched the MVP of that last year. And what that does is it really takes these data sets and brings them to life. So you can see in each of your locations what species were detected. You can understand a little bit more about those species. Are they endangered? Are they invasive, for example? I mean, the cost of invasive species is absolutely astronomical. Yeah. And how do different areas compare? So if you have one area which is untouched and you're using that as your control group, and you have another area where, say, there's mining activity happening, what impact have you had? How much have you actually reduced biodiversity in the area? What species have moved? And that is what the platform gives you. So when I joined, we had a pretty big team, 150, mostly UK and Europe based, and then we had a smaller team in Canada as well. And then if I look at what's happened in the last 12 months, it's been, I guess, a really interesting continuation of that transition. So we're moving into this world where I wouldn't call us, a pure SaaS-based solution, because the eDNA is still kind of the foundation of everything that we're doing, but it is an end-to-end product that involves kind of the physical lab operations as well as delivery through the software platform. So there's this element of kind of science meets digital technology. And with that, we've had to really spend a lot of time understanding what clients, what problems they're trying to solve. If you're trying to give somebody insights, those insights have to be useful. You have to actually help them achieve their goal. So it's really kind of detaching yourself from, well, I think this is a really interesting metric based on this data set, but it might be interesting, but is it actually applicable in the real world? So we've had to validate that a lot. And, this is a new space. Our clients are on a journey of discovery. So a lot of the time, they don't even know what they want. They don't even know who they would be sharing a lot of those insights with. So it is there's a lot of ambiguity that you have to navigate along the way. And I think we made some really good progress in terms of actually, this is where we are going to focus for next year. And having the conviction to say, yes, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it without fear of failure or fear of missing the market. So that's been kind of the biggest change on the product front. And then in terms of the team, we've had to, I guess, go through that natural transition where it is that startup to scale up mode.
Yes.
Where, your business is growing fairly organically in the early stages. You now realize that actually the org structure is not quite right. The ways of working need a bit of work. And actually, it's quite painful sometimes to make the adjustment and to rearrange the org structure, make sure you've got the resources in the right place, which is something that we did over the summer. And I think, I think everyone in the business understood why, and they understood that actually we'd almost reached a ceiling for that part of our growth. And now to unlock the next stage, there was some change needed. But those things are never easy to do.
Definitely. No. And how would you say the culture of the business has evolved in line with that change and that transition into this next phase? I mean, because you've got that interesting juxtaposition of, a science-driven, academically rooted, I suppose, organization that's now becoming this scale-up that's, offering insights to really large companies. How have you How are you marrying those two things in your culture, and how is the culture of the business evolving in line with that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, at its core, we are a mission-driven business. We come to work every day because we believe that the work we are doing is going to make the world a better place. We believe that there are bigger problems that we need to solve that extend beyond kind of just a day-to-day. And I think that's really important when you think about your culture, when you're thinking about how we really push people to, scale up to tough places to work. Yeah. And you have to really connect with why you are there. And I think that's what we've really held on to is, yes, we're scaling. We have to scale to have the impact that we want to have. You can have the best technology in the world, but if it's only used in this very small silo, then actually it's not going to have the impact that it could potentially have. So getting the technology out there, doing it in a way that is sustainable, that is financially viable, because ultimately we are a business, is actually a really important way of achieving the impact that we want to have. But I think there are a few things that kind of center us back to who we are and what's really important to us. So one is our mission. Mm-hmm. Why are we there? What are we trying to achieve? What is the change that we want to drive in the world? The second piece is the scientific credibility and the integrity of what we do. Because I think particularly when you're scaling very quickly, it's easy to drop the bar slightly on the quality front. And that's something that we hold very high, and it's really important to actually being able to scale with integrity. So, we want to make sure that everything that we are doing, whether we're 10x the size of where we are today, it's the same level of quality. We can stand behind it scientifically. We have a team in the business, our ecology team, and, they rigorously validate everything before it goes out to market. And if they say no, then it's not good enough. So before we even get into thinking about how it's delivered through the platform and, what the architecture needs to look like, etc., if the metric does not work from an ecological perspective, then we are not putting it out there. Amazing. So I think it's having some of those measures, checks and measures in place. And you're saying, yes, we're scaling. Yes, we're trying to achieve, this amount of growth and target these markets and this level of internationalization. But fundamentally, this is what we hold really dear to us in the business, and these are the ways in which we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And I think, in terms of the culture, what has been really interesting is I think the team are closer now than they were 12 months ago. I think we've really tried to drive more collaborative working, which I think, definitely for me is the foundation of building a successful tech company, is that the cross-functional way of bringing products to life, which was actually quite new to NatureMetrics when I joined. So really bringing teams together, bringing people in who are specialists in their own field, but actually they are fields that sometimes are at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Sometimes with technology, it only has to be 80% or even 70% of the way there before it can go to market. But actually with science, often you're looking for the final 5% because you're not happy until you have it.
That ship fast mentality combined with science. Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's being like, okay, well, what is the middle ground, and where are we willing to compromise and where are we not? And fundamentally, how do we communicate with each other?
Yeah.
Because, we have a shared mission, we have shared goals, and we have shared objectives. So we either succeed together or we fail together, but there is no world in which one team is successful and another team fails, but the business does well.
Yeah. Amazing. And where's the you in that, right? In the cultural piece, right? Because as CEO, you are a lot of this cultural stuff is top down, right? And trickles down from what you embody and what you believe and your personal values. So how do you kind of personally show up as a leader? What's your philosophy, and how do you feel that you've started to embed some of that into the organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think this applies to me as a CEO. I think it applies to anybody that is in a leadership position. So across our exec team as well, is you have to live and breathe the culture and the ways of working and the expectations that you have of the team. You have to demonstrate them every single day. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be surprised if people call you out on it. And I think I really believe in a very strong feedback culture. I try to give feedback a lot. I communicate a lot. And, that is what I expect people to do across the organization as well, providing feedback in a constructive way, not a personal way. So you do it in a way where you're helping that person be better for themselves and be better for the business, because fundamentally you are all on the same team and you want that team to be, as high performing as possible. So one is asking for feedback. Mm-hmm. If we do an all hands, I will always then try and say, what did you think? Was there anything that landed particularly well? Was there anything that, you think might have been slightly off the mark, or that might be missing that we can maybe tweak before we use it again? But it's not like, did you think I was good? See what I mean? Yeah. It's very much, positioning it as like this mindset of continuous improvement.
Yeah. Seeing everything as a process rather than the personal. How could this process be better? Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second thing is asking for help. I'm not a scientist. I'm an economist. So I am by no means the expert at anything within NatureMetrics. We have so many people in there that have PhDs in these absolutely mind-blowing fields. And quite often I will be sitting in the room and I will be the person that knows the least about a particular subject. And that is incredibly humbling. I think it's amazing. I mean, the amount that you can learn from being in the room with people like that is incredible. And, I might know how to then take it to market and scale it and kind of make all the things happen on the other side. But being able to ask for help when you're unfamiliar, I think is really, really important. And I think it also shows vulnerability as a leader. So there's that willingness to be wrong, the willingness to be corrected. And I think when you model those behaviors, it also, I hope, make people more comfortable to show their own vulnerabilities, or show, areas where they think they need to do a little bit more work, or ask for help themselves. So I'd say those are kind of some of the key pieces. And then I think as a CEO, you do have to make some really difficult decisions. I had to make some difficult decisions over the summer. And your job is not to be popular. A lot of the decisions that you have to make are often for the good of the business. And, a lot of the time it will be because you are operating off more data points than most people in the organization have. You have more context than other people have. And whilst you can't be completely transparent and share absolutely everything, I think it is really important to explain the why behind the decisions that are being made as well. Mm-hmm. So people understand, they might not agree with them all, but they understand why decisions have had to be made and why things have played out the way that they have. And I think a lot of the time when people understand why, they can rationalize what is happening, but it also helps them detach the personal from the business requirement. It helps them understand, okay, this isn't about me individually as a person. This is just what the business needs. And ultimately, we have to put the business's interest first. So I think the why around as many big decisions, small decisions, but I think there's always a learning opportunity in there. And I think also when I'm in a conversation where somebody shares work that they've done or they positioned it a certain way, I will also try and extract, like, why have you done it that way? Or, what information were you working off? Because I won't know that, but I leave the room potentially having new data points that I didn't have before.
That's amazing. I love that. And I think all of those things combined give that culture of transparency and also create that feeling of, I suppose, that psychological safety in which other people can be vulnerable about what they don't know, and other people feel they can share feedback because it's an environment in which that's encouraged and welcomed. Yeah, that's amazing. And you've been in such a variety of different environments, right? So really male dominated trading floor, running a busy chain of coffee shops, an digital first e-commerce business, and now a very scientifically grounded organization. What are the kind of, I suppose, core challenges and lessons, I guess, you've learned through that time about building strong, high performing teams? And are there some lessons in that are kind of relevant in all of those environments, sort of universal, I suppose, to all of those environments.
Yeah, so I think when I think about high performing teams, I mean, it's a subject that I'm actually very passionate about. I think the team for me is one of the most important factors in whether a business succeeds or not.
Yeah.
And I actually find kind of how teams come together and how they interact and the different players that you have in the room just personally really, really interesting. So, you know, all of that chatter around sports team psychology, etc. So much of that is applicable to working within a scale-up environment. I mean, you're facing a lot of pressure. You have to go 100 miles an hour every day. A lot of your plays are not going to work. And there are a lot of win-lose situations. You know, it can be quite binary at times. But I think what for me really stands out with the best performing teams is the trust that you see between the players.
Right.
So, you know, people are coming in with the assumption that everybody is there to operate in the best interest of the team and of the business. So egos are left at the door. You know, people are not coming into the room trying to serve themselves. They're there in the service of others and the service of, you know, a bigger cause. And I think this is, for me, why mission-driven companies are so important, because it is being able to see beyond the tasks that you are doing that day. And I think that is really valuable in terms of bringing a team together. What it also means is then when teams are working together, they trust, A, the decisions that people are making, but B, they trust in feedback that they're receiving. And when tasks are being divided out, they know that the other people on the team are going to pick up their piece and they're going to get things done. So actually it's like a well-oiled machine, but for me, trust is that piece. So knowing that you've had that conversation, you're able to walk away and get on with what you need to do, knowing that somebody on the other side is going to be doing exactly what you need them to be doing as well. It removes all of the politics.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of politics. I don't think there's any room for politics in startups and scale-ups, particularly. I know that larger corporates can be quite political, and I have seen those situations. And actually, when you think about the number of hours in the working week that get lost in political maneuvering, it's just incredibly inefficient. Yeah.
And in terms of building that trust, Dimple, so like, what are some, and you've mentioned a few things there, right? So having a culture of honest feedback. So therefore that builds the trust that you believe people are telling you the truth. You believe people want the best for each other. What are some other really simple ways of being able to build that trust amongst team members?
So I think one thing that's often really overlooked, I see this quite a lot. So if I introduce people on their, you know, within an onboarding schedule, for example, and you have a new joiner and they have their first session with you and you're a function lead, so often I see them have that intro session and the function lead launches straight into, this is what my function does, this is what we're focused on, this is what we deliver, these are our key projects, da, 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 da. And so many times I'll be like, you're just supposed to have a coffee? You're just supposed to, like, just get to know each other. Like, what did you learn about the other person as a human being in that session? And they'll be like, no, I covered this. I don't care about that. Like, you will cover that at some point in the future, but use that initial interaction to really get to know the person, because that helps you understand how to communicate with them. And usually what will happen is you will find some commonality. There'll be something that you have in common that becomes a linchpin of your relationship. And I think, like, just tactically, things like that, really get to know people, get to know their lives outside of work and what drives them and how they like to receive feedback, how they communicate, how they respond to difficult situations. Because when you're building a company, you're going to have a lot of those difficult situations. And a lot of the time, somebody's reaction to a situation is about them. It's not about you. So actually being able to understand that, be like, okay, they've shut down. That's because they're feeling particularly anxious. It's not they shut down because they don't agree with what I have said. It helps you kind of reframe some of the situations that arise. So I'd say that's the first piece. I think the other piece that is really valuable is diversity within teams. But when we think about diversity, there's some parts that you want to have kind of to some degree fixed and common in a business, which are your ways of working, how you communicate, how projects are run, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there are other areas where you really do want diverse opinions, diverse thought, background, etc. And I think that's something you do have to be really intentional about. I think, when you're building tech companies, it's very easy to just say, right, I hired this person and they were great, so I'm going to hire 10 more of these people. Because
if I had a penny for every time in my recruitment career somebody had said to me, can you find me another insert name here? That is often how I get given a brief. Can you find me another John? Can you find me another Sue? Yeah.
Yes. And if you think about the diminishing returns, because then you find another one of that person, you bring them in and you go, oh, that person gave us a 50% uplift in X. I brought another one in and actually nothing changed. It's yes, you've maxed out this type of profile.
Yeah.
Actually, what you need is somebody completely different that tells you where the next piece of innovation is going to come from. And, international teams is a really, really good way to do that, particularly if you are an international business, because it gives you a lens on how businesses operate locally. It gives you a lens on, different, how different cultures think about your product and how to communicate differently. And also just adds a vibrancy to the team culture and, the holidays that you celebrate and that whole piece as well. And that's why I think actually those intro coffees and getting to know people is really, really important, because through working with people that have completely different backgrounds to you, different thought processes, opinions and interests, you broaden your own mindset as well. Yeah. But you also create space for those slightly wildcard ideas. And those wildcard ideas are the ones that are usually the one, they step change your company.
Yeah, I love that, because you're right. If you just hire homogeny, then in some ways, great, because if everybody thinks the same and everybody is the same and you've got another cookie cutter version of that same person, in some ways, perhaps you can move quickly and the conveyor belt can move faster, but it's only going to be the same conveyor belt with the same product on it, going at the same speed, in the same direction. It's not that vibrancy of thought, the things that take you to the next level aren't there, right? And I suppose that's when companies they plateau and then start to tail off as the competition takes over, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of sort of a question about hiring, actually, before I move on to the scaling piece, when you're working in a space that's so emergent, right? So biodiversity, I know, the science around ecology isn't necessarily new, but what you're doing with it and how you're applying it is very new. How challenging is that for you from a talent perspective in terms of bringing new people in? When you're working on something so emergent, is it difficult to find the right skill sets and the right talent to come on board and join the mission?
Yeah, so I think it's difficult, but it actually also makes it easier. Okay. We have an incredible mission. We have a mission that really resonates with people as well. So that does make hiring easier, because fundamentally we want everyone that comes to work with us to really care about what we're doing. So, if you don't care about the mission, NatureMetrics probably isn't the right place for you. And so that immediately acts as quite a good filter. Yeah. But then, on the other hand, like you say, it's a new market, and that means there's a lot of ambiguity. So I'd say that is the second piece. There are some people that, will join tech companies where they're building something new, but it's known.
Right.
And so they can build new products within the known space, and they can do it very well. What we're doing is we're building new products within the unknown space. And that level of ambiguity makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. And I think that is something that you have to really try and work out in the interview process. And it can be anything from case studies where you're kind of intentionally looking at how much information or data you're giving them as part of that case study presentation, and how they manage it and how they handle kind of gaps in the data. There's a lot of dot connecting that needs to be done, but sometimes that does then mean that people have to fall back on instincts.
Right.
And there's some people that are really good at that. and there are other people that will struggle and will try and apply kind of the slightly more linear mindset of if this, then that. So I think that is the piece that we're trying to really like filter for when we're hiring. I think at that point, we're not even talking about the subject matter.
No.
So this is, really skill sets, how they think, how they draw on frameworks that they know, but don't apply them too rigidly that they constrain their thinking. Really, really difficult actually to try and get that from a traditional interview process as well. And then I think in terms of the actual subject matter itself, there's so many parts of what we do that are known, when we're building software platform, when we are looking at our data flows and data pipelines and, a lot of the operations and logistics, etc. These are problems that other companies have solved and they solved at scale. So, from an expertise perspective, there are people that have these individual pockets of experience that we're looking to bring together. I think where it gets difficult is when you are looking for people to then sit in the middle. So these might be more product people, they might be more operational people, where they have to look across all of these different parts of your solution and think about the best way to connect them. Because that is fundamentally where the innovation is. It's the way in which the pieces come together. And that is a hire that I find always takes the longest to make. I think most of the hiring that I do for those roles are done through referrals and recommendations. So I will reach out to people that I know whose opinion I really value, and say, hey, I'm looking for this hire. This is exactly what they would be covering, and these are things to be mindful of. So that's where I would flag, they might not always know what they need to be building, or they might not be operating with full visibility of their data or their requirements. And I will always start there and say, who do you know? Who can you connect me with? Who would you recommend that you have worked with previously? Before I then go down kind of the more traditional kind of recruitment route. And then even in that world, take references. I think references are so important. Official references, and if you can, unofficial references as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. And especially about that part of, the different needs for the different roles. So somewhere you are solving a known problem. And so therefore it is about expertise in that space. And then for others, are you capable of taking what you know and applying it to something entirely unknown? And then these people in the middle that I suppose are the bakers, right? They take the raw ingredient, they take all those ingredients and they create the recipe. They blend that all together into that unique thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing. And in terms of scaling, I mean, you mentioned this earlier with some of the challenges that you had over the summer as you were sort of course correcting, might be the perhaps wrong phrase to use, but getting the business fit to enter that next stage of growth, right? And you alluded there to the fact that, not every hire perhaps within a business, not every player within the team is the right fit for the long term. And that's such a common growing pain, right? As a company starts to scale, the people that were completely the right people to get you to here might not be the right people to take you there. And that's such a difficult transition to manage. I wonder, just side note, and I might be wrong in this, perhaps that transition's slightly easier to manage if you're somebody coming in from the outside and you can, have that split. Perhaps when you were the original founder and you've got to that point, it can be, there's a lot of messy emotional stuff, I suppose, that comes in at that point. But what advice could you give to other leaders, other founders that are approaching this transition point where they're needing to think about, right, we need to get to the next stage? And perhaps the people I've got in the team at this point aren't quite right. How do you unpick that? How do you decide who is right to move forward? And how do you have or approach those difficult conversations with those people that aren't right for that next phase?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think a really important starting point, though, is acknowledging that the default situation is that the business outgrows the team.
Right.
Like, that is a dream. Yeah, that's a good thing. Like, if you have a business that is scaling so quickly that actually the team are unable to keep up pace with that, like assuming that you have a really high performing, excellent team, that means that you have built something that is genuinely going to it's going to change the world, it's going to make a massive difference, etc. That's an indication of success. And I think people often look at it the wrong way around and they say, oh, the business doesn't need me anymore. The reality is, if the business explodes, chances are in a few years it won't need me anymore, because that's what scale ups are about.
That's a really nice way of framing it. So it's like you've done so well that you did that. Like, it's got too big for you, but because you made that, right? Yeah,
yes,
that's lovely.
Absolutely. And like, we are all human at the end of the day. Like, you go through school, and as you're going through school, you grow a little bit every year, right? At no point in school did your teacher turn around and say to you, I expect you to 5x in the next 12 months. So I know you're 11 years old, but you're going to sit your GCSEs.
Some schools might.
Did you see? It's like, and I think we've got to be reasonable about what the expectations are. And I think there are people that fit different stages of a company's growth. There are some people that are clearly early stage people. They might not even identify as that yet. I think it takes a little bit of time in your career to understand exactly which segment you fit into or where you play best. And naturally, some of those early stage people may get to scale up stage and realize that actually they're a bit bored now, or they can't be as creative as they want to be, or there's all of this structure going in that they don't really like, or that they're just struggling to reach the next level that the business needs them to reach. And that's uncomfortable for everyone, right? It's uncomfortable for the business, their manager, and for the person on the team. Now, in those situations, sometimes it might mean that you bring somebody else in a bit more senior than them and they get layered. Typically in that situation, I would take them on the journey. I would have them be part of that recruitment process, especially if this new person is going to be their boss. This is an opportunity for them to learn from somebody who, a lot of the time may have done this before. Because I think that's the other thing with scale ups. You have people arriving in the company that have done this once, twice, 3 times before. You cannot possibly expect somebody that is doing this for the first time to instinctively know all the things that, a seasoned veteran in the space has picked up across 10 years. So I think, there's a bit of just a reality check that we all have to give ourselves in those situations. And then, there are other times when it might be best for that team member to move on and they have other interests they want to pursue. I think whenever you get to that kind of juncture, though, you have to handle it with compassion and kindness, because anybody that comes into a startup or a scale up has put their entire heart and soul into what they are building. Like, it takes an incredible amount of hard work to get to a business to a stage where it is reaching that level of pace and momentum and scale. So actually detaching yourself from that can be really, really emotional. And I've been there, I burst out crying in front of my entire team when I told them I was leaving at Truva, and it was disgusting. I didn't have any tissues, and there's a whole process that you have to go through when you get to that point. And also, having someone leave doesn't suddenly erase all the work that they have done to that date. They will always be a part of that journey. They will always be a part of the success that then comes. And I think a lot of it comes from how do you handle it? And then, after you've had that conversation, how do you support them after that? What do they want to do next? Who can you introduce them to? References, all of the things that help them then find something that is going to give them as much fulfillment as they got from that role in your company. But I think there is an inevitability to it. And I think it is a good thing for businesses. As they grow, their needs evolve. It's the same way with humans and when you're raising children.
Well, exactly. As a parent, it wouldn't be a mark of success if at 25, 35, your children still needed you the same way they did when they were 5. You're supposed to do such a good job that they don't need you anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, if you handle the situation within the company with the same level of care that you would for those transitions, I think that is the most important part, because then you're being kind to the person that's going through the change, but you're also giving the business what the business needs.
Yeah. That's amazing. But that's I love that. I love that reframing of the entire thing. I think that's fantastic, and leading it with that compassion, that empathy that honors the role that people have played to this point and congratulates the role that they've played, and makes it clear that their legacy within that business will always be there because they were so crucial to this point. And then either taking them on that journey to reposition them, or exiting them, but doing so kindly and helping them on their onward journey. Yeah, I love that. But I mean, that's told, I suppose, with such wisdom, and comes from a place of clearly such wisdom when it comes to people and emotional intelligence. I'm intrigued as to where that's kind of come from, or what mentoring or support or advice, has been passed down to you through your journey that some of this has come from, I suppose. Have you had mentors, advisors that have helped you understand this stuff, has taught you this stuff, and helped taught you how to build great teams?
So I actually haven't. I know. So I jumped in headfirst into building my first company. So in all honesty, a lot of the early stuff I learned was from getting things wrong.
Right.
I made so many mistakes in my first business, and had to kind of really reflect on those and think about how I could have played things differently, and then kind of change that going forward. I would say it's only really over the last kind of, I'd say 3 to 5 years, that I've started to meet people where I can have those conversations and say, hey, like, have you ever dealt with a situation like this? Like, how would you play it? What did you learn from those situations? I don't have a formal mentor. I have almost, the best way to describe it is just a pool of incredible minds that I will draw on when I have particular questions. I actually have a great relationship with people that I've worked with previously as well, who, where we have kind of reflected on some of the challenges that we faced, how we could have, for me, it's that retrospective piece. It's kind of saying, okay, we've come out the other side of this. What did we miss? And, why was this person surprised when we had this conversation? And, a lot of the time as well, the outcome and how that conversation plays out has nothing to do with that conversation itself. It's often to do with all the things that came before. And actually having people where you can unpick that with, and some of it will be with my exec team. So, some of the changes we made over the summer, how did they land? What did we miss? What has the feedback been? What's survived in the company? If we were to do it again, I really hope we don't. I have no plan to do it again. But what would we have done differently? And I think it is just being able to hold that up in a safe space and say, these are the areas where I potentially dropped the ball. And then I have more recently, but it's still very early days, started working with a coach. So I'm very, very excited to see how that goes. Yeah. So I've heard great things about the value of exec coaching, particularly in dealing with kind of difficult people-related situations. So that will be kind of a whole new learning experience for me.
Yeah, amazing. I have a business coach that I've worked with in the 4 years since I've been running my business, and it's been invaluable. I think also I'm a solo founder, right? So I don't have that kind of exec team to bounce off, but it's been absolutely invaluable. And sometimes I'll have a session booked with her and I'll think, I've got nothing to say today. I don't know what I'm going to talk to her about. And then an hour later, so much stuff has come out of it.
Yes.
It's been invaluable. And I mean, you're really plugged into the community with your advisory work, your mentoring work with BAE HQ, with Concept Ventures. How important is that to your career? And I suppose, how important do you see those communities and those groups as resources for other founders, but also in terms of sort of reverse mentoring in a way? What have, I suppose, you gained that you've brought into your role as a leader from the experiences and the relationships that you've had through doing that work?
Yes. So I had a really interesting conversation. It was probably about 3 years ago now. So I wasn't big on social media. I'm still not particularly big on social media. I kind of keep my head down, get on with my work. Didn't do a lot of the kind of like networking, event, community stuff. And somebody once said to me, you say that you didn't have any strong female role models growing up, but if you don't put yourself out there, then aren't you depriving other young women of having a strong female role model themselves? And I'd never thought about it that way before, but they totally called me out.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's quite hypocritical. And I was like, I can't argue with that, actually. That is true. And I'm naturally very introverted. So at that point, I had to really get over the whole like, oh God, okay, I've got to do more peopling. This sounds very painful. But actually did it from through a lens of, okay, well, if I am going to be that role model, you know, where can I add value? Who do I want to spend my time outside of work, outside of my family with? And I think the piece for me that really stood out was underprivileged communities. I grew up in a council estate. You know, I've had to kind of navigate all of the challenges that come with that. But actually, if I'm able to shortcut someone else's learnings, if I'm able to give them an introduction that helps them start a business, or I'm able to maybe just warn them, you know, give them an indication of something to look out for that I didn't get myself, then that could be potentially game changing for them. So when I think about a lot of the work that I do there, it is much more about kind of trying to level the playing field a little bit. I think when you look at technologies and startups, it's so linked to capital and raising money and VC, and you know, it's a space that's built for privilege. And if you don't have privilege in this space, you are so on the back foot. You might be 5, 10, 15 years behind somebody that knows the right people, wears the right trainers, you know.
A lot of the jargon that goes with it as well is so opaque. Yeah. You're not from that world, especially a lot of the venture jargon that gets thrown around. How did you know?
It's impenetrable. And I think, you know, with a lot of the work that I do, it is very focused on women, underprivileged founders, and it will be anything from, you know, we'll chat through your business idea or your go-to-market strategy, or it could be, you know, I did some work with a founder that was actually in quite a difficult place because she was being pushed out of her company and didn't know how to manage it, but then saw her 12 months later and she just looked like this completely different person having come out the other side. And I think that is, outside of work, that's how I want to be spending my time. So I learn a huge amount from those conversations, because to some degree, it is a bit of a reality check that the world probably hasn't changed as much as I would have liked it to change. I think my place in the world has changed a bit. So now it's really thinking about what I can do to help other people accelerate kind of their rise. And how do I, particularly with concept, how do I put incredible founders who do have the grit and the resilience to build game-changing companies in front of the money and the people that will back them. So really it is, what part can I play to help people that represent the majority of the world population build the solutions that the world needs, rather than just that 1%.
Yeah. There's a Michelle Obama quote, isn't there? Which I will never get right, so I won't even try to, but it's something along the lines of, after you've climbed up, making sure you're reaching back and grabbing others and pulling them through with you. So yeah, love
exactly
that. And what would your parting, I mean, you've already imparted so much wisdom here, I feel awful asking you for more, but what would your sort of parting wisdom be for founders? To wrap up, if you could just offer sort of one piece of advice to our listeners who are early stage climate tech founders primarily, right, about building teams, about creating a culture that will endure, what would it be?
So I think if we're going really early stage and we're talking about kind of the first members that join your team, they have to really believe in what you are building. They have to believe in the vision, but they also have to believe that it's achievable. So, and you need that early team to stick around. Like, they might not stick around more than like 3 to 5 years, because chances are they'll get bored and move on. But like, you do not want, when you are trying to solve all of the problems around early funding, product market fit, trying to work out who your first customers are, you do not want to have to deal with people coming and going in your team. You want to create as much stability in that early team as possible. So making sure that they are really bought into the vision and the mission of what you are trying to build and why it's important, but that it is possible. And I think that is a piece that often people forget, because a lot of early stage founders, it's about painting the dream when you're going out and you're raising money and, that moonshot. But what your team want to know is that they're not being set up for failure.
Right.
So what they want to see is the ladder that gets them to achieving that goal and that vision. And I think when you have that early team, it make it connect it back to the ground for them. I think once they have that, if you've got the right people on board, you've got those the Swiss Army knives that you really need at the beginning. They'll do what they need to do, and they will make everything else happen.
Amazing. Love that. Thank you so much for everything, for spending this last hour when I appreciate you're not feeling too well today. But thank you so much, because I think there's been so much in there that will be so valuable to the founders that are listening who are earlier on in the journey than you are. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.